The submitted material analyzes the reported collapse of the Iranian regime after the alleged massacre of 12,000 protesters in January 2026. And it offers some very charged commentary on the global reaction.
It's an incredibly urgent piece of work. You can feel the frustration. So let's just jump right into how we can refine that edge for, maximum impact.
Okay, so the first thing that really stood out, the relentless use of aggressive, vulgar, and highly charged language. It actually distracts from the gravity of the central humanitarian catastrophe being reported.
Right.
We can see the justified anger, especially over the lack of mainstream coverage, but the volume is just turned up so high, it's kind of defeating its own purpose.
So what's the weakness there specifically?
The weakness is that the material is just so full of ad hominem attacks. We're seeing terms like retards, cucks, pussy shit, and, these really aggressive descriptions of political figures.
And all of that just overshadows the actual core of the story.
Exactly. The core story is the reported 12,000 people murdered. This rhetorical noise turns a serious human rights appeal into a partisan spectacle.
Which makes it incredibly easy for anyone who disagrees with the political frame to just dismiss the whole thing. You're basically giving the skeptic a free pass to ignore the tragedy.
That's it, exactly.
But, I have to ask, with a tragedy of this size, 12,000 deaths is a number that should shock everyone. Isn't there a risk that dialing the intensity down too far makes the message sound, sterile or academic?
That's a great question, and I think you find that line by trusting the facts themselves to be the outrage.
Okay.
So the suggestion is really to recalibrate the emotional intensity. You have these staggering factual claims, the 12,000 killed, the use of death squads, that direct quote from Khamenei about rape and execution.
Those facts are horrific enough to stand on their own.
They are. They really are.
A more measured, a more factual presentation, it just lets the weight of the tragedy land naturally. It maximizes the audience's empathy for the victims, no matter what their politics are.
Right. When the vocabulary starts sounding like a YouTube comment section, it stops moving people. It just starts, segmenting the audience. It becomes about the messenger, not the message.
Let's zero in on a specific example of that pivot. When you quote Khamenei, saying something like, "Before you execute the woman, rape her so she doesn't get to heaven."
Which is just unbelievable.
That quote, that single statement, is the atomic bomb of the argument. It needs no surrounding hyperbole to show the barbarity of the regime. You have to trust the horror of that statement itself.
Yeah, when you add all the extra language, you're actually taking heat away from that core atrocity.
Exactly.
And we can look at the section on the U-Haul attack against protesters in America. Instead of immediately calling the driver a pro-Palestine retard, the focus should shift entirely
to what?
To rigorously focusing on the details of the actual act of terrorism on American soil and the documented evidence, the fact that the driver was carrying anti-Shah banners.
Oh, that's a brilliant tactical shift.
Why do you say that?
Because by focusing on the act terrorism on American soil, you move the incident from being a messy, partisan issue to a domestic national security threat.
Right, which mobilizes a totally different and broader segment of the audience you're trying to reach.
Exactly. The focus moves from a foreign policy dispute to protecting U.S. citizens from political violence. You're being strategically smart about the language you use to frame the facts.
And that strategic shift from just pure outrage to a more controlled analysis is where this material can gain some serious persuasive power.
It means you're fighting on two fronts. You're exposing the horror in Iran, and you're surgically exposing the hypocrisy in the West. It ensures the facts you present are actually received, not filtered out.
We've covered controlling the volume on the passion, but, volume doesn't matter if the signal keeps breaking up. Let's talk about narrative integrity.
The structure.
The structure that holds this urgent message. The material suffers from some pretty significant structural fracturing. It frequently diverts away from the core Iranian crisis to engage in a lot of political score settling.
And the argument here is that the urgency of the moment, the protests, the massacres, the currency collapsing to zero, is repeatedly getting derailed.
Right, by these tangents intended to attack specific, often unrelated political figures or groups.
We see this fracture happening constantly. You jump from the situation in Tehran to the U-Haul incident in the U.S., then back to the history of the Gaza conflict, then into these really extensive criticisms of commentators like Sneo or Hassan Piker, Glenn Greenwald.
And then deep dives on AOC's voting record.
Right. And while those critiques might be perfectly valid, the rapid movement, it just compromises the sustained focus you need for a world event this big. The listener gets narrative whiplash.
You struggle to keep the main crisis centered.
And the danger isn't just a loss of focus. You risk alienating people who agree with your core human rights message, but might reject the specific messengers you're attacking in the tangent.
So, what's the suggestion?
It's actually pretty simple. Implement much clearer thematic segmentation. If your goal is to criticize the reaction from the left, then group all of those critiques, AOC, the Harvard protests, Greenwald, into one continuous, controlled segment.
The core tragedy has to be the anchor point. The loss of life, those Starlink messages about people losing their fear of death, the street fights, that is the main event.
These other things should feel like dedicated detours, not, accidental crashes off the side of the road.
Every segment of criticism has to feel like a deliberate, controlled response to that primary tragedy, not a separate political agenda.
Right, this lets the listener process the tragedy itself, and then process the analysis of the external reaction separately.
So a concrete example of this would be what?
Okay, so rather than immediately jumping from the breaking news of Trump's canceled meetings or the 12,000 deaths to what went down in America with the U-Haul.
You'd maintain the focus on the immediate international reaction first.
Exactly. What was Germany's crucial declaration? What was the reaction from Turkey? You build the international picture first.
Or, alternatively, when you're dealing with the commentators, you could create one major segment dedicated entirely to summarizing their arguments.
Yeah, a section on Sneo advocating for the dictatorship. Another on Greenwald claiming it's too complex for him to comment. You give the tangents controlled space, prove your point efficiently, and then you pivot back, definitively, to the reality on the ground in Tehran.
It shows command of the material.
That's the key word, control. It shows the audience you're prioritizing the crisis and that your engagement with these other figures is a calculated editorial choice, not just a distraction born out of frustration.
And controlling those information streams is absolutely essential. Because structural integrity and rhetorical discipline, they directly impact the material's credibility.
Which brings us right to the third major area of opportunity.
How you handle the evidence itself.
Right.
The material undermines its own powerful, verified claims by failing to distinguish high credibility, factual reports from, unverified speculation, rumors, and these overarching conspiracy theories.
And this is where the trust you've built with the listener can just erode so quickly.
We see really strong evidence, like the Iran International claims of 12,000 deaths, which far exceeds the official numbers, the confirmed internet blackout, the currency collapse to near zero.
And it's all being presented on equal footing with claims from low-certainty sources or just pure speculation.
And those speculative points are major ones. They include that Wall Street Journal report on J.D. Vance's diplomatic advocacy, which the presenter even admits, I don't know how true this is.
And then that massive conclusion that the left is literally an indoctrinated cult being pushed by radical Islamists overseas.
When verifiable body bags are mentioned in the same breath as unverified diplomatic rumors, the verifiable facts just lose their power.
Because the listener starts to question everything, and that skepticism is the single biggest threat to your message. The politically skeptical people, the ones you most need to convince, will seize on the weakest link in your evidence chain and use it to dismiss the entire thing.
Right. If they catch you presenting speculation as fact just one time, they mentally downgrade every other data point you've offered, including the 12,000 deaths.
That makes perfect sense. So the suggestion is simple. Implement clear rhetorical markers to signal the distinction.
Signposts.
Exactly. When you're introducing rumors or maybe compromised information, frame the discussion around the implications of the rumor or the source's motive rather than just presenting it as fact.
This preserves the credibility of the really impactful reports, like the massacres.
Let's look at the Qatari funding issue. That's a good example.
Okay, so when discussing the factual finding about the $6.5 billion in Qatari funding to U.S. universities, you acknowledge that it is a factual finding. It legitimately raises massive questions about foreign influence.
That is an undeniable fact that needs scrutiny.
But you have to stop short of concluding it's definitive, ironclad proof that the entire left is literally an indoctrinated cult.
That's a huge speculative.
It is. It raises a legitimate possibility of corruption. It is not a direct conclusion of a grand cult conspiracy. You have to signal that this fact raises questions, not that it proves conspiracy. The language there really matters.
And it's the same thing with the J.D. Vance side. Instead of introducing it as compromise shit that sounds like he's being handled.
You frame the discussion around how the reported advocacy for diplomacy, what the piece calls the Obama timeline, how that conflicts with Trump's later hardline tweet, "I have canceled all meetings."
So you're using the unverified report as context.
Exactly. To highlight the perceived tension within the U.S. government's response, you turn speculation about one person into a verified analysis of political dynamics.
And that shift from accusation to sophisticated analysis, while keeping the edge, is really where this material can level up.
This piece is powerful, but that power absolutely needs to be contained and targeted to be effective.
I agree.
So, when we look at this massive, powerful piece of journalism, it seems like three key levers stand out for maximum impact.
Okay.
First, recalibrate the tone and style. Just let the seriousness of the reported 12,000 deaths and the sheer brutality of the regime resonate on its own, without relying on all the ad hominem attack.
The facts are sharp enough. Don't dull them.
Second, strengthening the structural cohesion. Isolate your political tangents, your critiques of U.S. media and figures into clear, dedicated segments.
Right. The core Iranian crisis, the collapse, the massacres, the bravery of the people, that has to remain the anchoring narrative you always come back to.
And third, improve the argument robustness. Clearly separate the highly credible factual reports, like the body count and the currency collapse, from political rumors and broad conspiracy theories. Use those rhetorical markers.
And controlling the tone and isolating the tangents will directly increase the credibility of your fact. The emotional energy here is a tremendous asset. It proves you care deeply about the victims and the fact.
Right.
So we've just encouraged you to use that passion, but apply the rhetorical restraint and the structural control we've talked about. You have a massive story, and it deserves the most robust and carefully presented case possible. We are genuinely excited to see how you apply this, and we invite you to submit your revised material back in again for a future critique.